Hi, my name is Martin Perhignac. Welcome back to the digital art series here on PSD Tuts Plus. Today we are going to continue talking and learning about drawing drapery in Photoshop. In the previous episode we learned about the basics and we understood how we need to combine the basic tools, the brush tool, mixer brush, the dodge and the burn tools to create a semi-realistic drapery. And today's seminar will be about how to use the same technique to create a character art, a concept art, and in this case we are going to use the drapery to create the robe of a skeleton mage or a necromancer. So this is just a very quick example. It took me 1.5 hours to draw this from scratch or from the sketches, but obviously the more time you spend on a digital painting, probably the better it will be, and you can work on more details. I just wanted to do this quickly and to be able to show you the whole process. Okay, so we will see how to do the whole drawing from start to finish. Actually, the start is going to be from the sketches, so I don't want to do the sketches in the tutorial because we already had another tutorial about that. As you can see, the sketches are going to be these, and I did 2 sketches because I was thinking first to do the character from front, but then I decided to do him more from the left or from the right, from the side, or a little bit from the back, to be able to show more of the drapery and to make it a bit more dramatic. Okay, so that's all what we need to know about this episode, and let's get started with the drawing. So as you can see, I'm going to work on a separate layer, and I'm going to turn off the skeleton itself and just leave on the drapery. I'm cleaning up the edges first of all, because the rough sketch that I had was just a guide, but now I would like to use these lines for my artwork, so I'm going to go through all the lines and make sure that they are nice and clean. So as you can see, I'm using the brush tool and just simply draw over all these areas, and I would like to define the folds, or use the folds to define the shape. And I always keep in mind what I have under the drapery or under the clothes. In this case we have a skeleton, so in this case there are not much to hold this drapery, so I would like to try to somehow emphasize that. So I'm going to use some folds on the back just to show a bit of that twist in on the upper body. And at this stage I wasn't really sure about colors or about the wand or staff that he's going to hold later on. I just want to do it quickly, and as you can see I filled in these lines with white. I prefer to use white and then draw over it with black and white, and then later on use color to create the final detail, but I prefer to work with just black and white tonal values. And it's always better if you have white already on the image itself. As you can see now, I start to use a soft edge brush and I start to fill in the shadows on the same layer. And because I filled in the whole drapery with white, I can turn on the transparency lock in the layers panel, and that makes sure I will only draw over the drapery itself, so I won't go outside the edges. And this is just a very quick way to create the tonal values that we need, so mainly the shadows, so to define the 3-dimensional form. I'm using 5 to 10% opacity on this brush and black as my color. and the soft edge. And I'm drawing over this layer. Your line art and this layer can be the same, so the tonal values and the line art can be the same, because then, as you can see now, I'm already switched to the mixer brush tool to smudge or mix together or blend together the lines and the tonal values. Now I'm started using the burn tool to emphasize the shadows further, so I can now clearly define the darkest parts of the image, which definitely will be under the cape, the head part, and in the back. I'm thinking of the lighting in this case coming from the top and the front. But once I'm going to apply shadows, you will see how I'm thinking of the lights. Now I'm using the hue saturation adjustment layer with colorize option turned on, and I turn it into a red color design on the cape. You don't really need to know the exact details on the hue saturation adjustment layer, but if you want to see it, you can always go back and pause the video if you want to read the exact values that I used. But it's not really necessary. It's better if you use whatever you like. It can be any colors. There's no real rules for that. Okay, so now I'm using the brush tool and I'm adding some orange highlights on the cape because it's always good to mix in more color variations into your design, because if you only use the dodge and burn tool, then it will look a bit fake. It will be monochrome. You will only use one color and just change the tonal value of that color, the brightness of that color. Instead of that, in real life, if you want to make it a bit more realistic, make it a bit more realistic in colors, you should always incorporate other colors as well. So in this case, for the highlights, I'm using orange or yellow colors. And for this side on the right, I'm using blue, which is going to define another light source, which you will see later on. I'm just preparing that light source now. And it's also a good way to make your colors a bit more rich in values, to use something complementary to the red colors. So if you only use like red and orange, it might be a bit dull, but if you incorporate like blue as well into your drawing, then it will make a difference. It will make it a bit more stand out. Now, as you can see, I'm switching back and forth between the tools that I used previously. I'm again using the mixer brush tool to define the folds further on the drapery. And I'm smudging or blending together these new colors, the orange into the red and the blue also into the red. And I'm defining more the highlights as well. I'm adding now pink colors also into my design just to create more highlights. And once I finish these, I will probably again use the mixer brush tool to blend these together again. By the way, I'm working on one layer, as you can see, so most of the cases I'm not really bothered about my layers when I'm doing digital art. Obviously, if you use separate layers for every element, it can help you to work non-destructively, but sometimes it just makes it a bit more difficult to make your changes. So most of the times I like to keep it simple and just work on one layer, especially if it's a character or a model. And maybe if I do a background, which you will see later on in this video, then I'm going to start using a separate layer for the background, because that's definitely something that I would like to keep separate. Now, as you can see, I turned back on that layer with the sketch, the original sketch of the skeleton, just to quickly fill in those areas, because before I finish, get to the final results on the drapery, I would like to also draw the skeleton itself. And as you can see now, I turned the background to black, because here I changed my mind and I wanted to basically to see the hand of the skeleton, which is going to be very bright, and on a white background it will be lost. And obviously the whole theme of a skeleton mage, it's better in a darker background. It looks better. And now, as you can see, I'm using the same technique, just blocking in first the main shape to capture the whole expression and whole detail for the skull. But then later on I will zoom closer and I will define it further. As you can see, I'm trying different things. I'm just planning what I'm going to do really with the skull. And now I started to add more details. I'm building a bit the shadows, and I'm also working on the holes on the eye and the nose. So I try to create the outline for the whole skull. Now I'm going to add more colors to it. Now probably it's going to be a bit later. I work a bit on the hand now, and I'm just cleaning up those edges that I had in the sketch. I'm using now the levels adjustment layer. As you can see, I made it more, or I increased the contrast by dragging the highlight and the shadow values closer to the middle. You can do it on a separate adjustment layer, but once again, this was something that I was sure that I would like to do, so I just simply used it destructively from the adjustments menu. Now I'm working on forward on the skull and on some lines around the cape. You can see I'm defining more details, like the teeth and the eyes, and I turn the inside of the cloth more darker, make it more menacing. And now I'm going to work up the hand also a bit more properly. And while I'm doing this, I'm always going back and forth on the cloth as well, even though that's more detailed. I would like to work on some details there as well. As you can see now, I also just finalize the drapery, the folds, and try to make it as a whole, the whole painting. Again, I'm working still on the skull, and now I'm going to create the wand or the staff. I just draw it quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on this because this tutorial is not really about the character art, but once I started drawing a character, it's hard to finish, so I would like to add some details to it, like this wand with the effect around it. In this version of the recording, it's not really good details in the background. The quality of this video tutorial won't show you all the colors that I had in the original design, but you will have a rough idea what I did there. Okay, I just used the radial gradient, by the way, for that purple effect around it, and I mainly use the brush tool. I'm adding some glow on the skull as well, just to reflect that purple light. And I'm going to add, I'm just experimenting with some details in the background, but I'm going to leave it black, and probably I'm going to change the intensity of the colors now. I'm using a vibrance adjustment layer, and as you can see now, the colors are much more intense than before, and this is actually the color that I was looking for. Now I'm placing the same color on the bottom. I'm using the elliptical selection tool, and then I just used a feather as well on it and filled it in with the same red color. And as you can see, I use it on the bottom to create that light effect there. And I do the same thing behind the wand, just to emphasize that purple haze around the headpiece. And now I'm going to I just added a distort effect, and I'm just playing around with effects, but this is again something that you don't really need to stick to. I just used a distort filter on that effect, but you can always do this with just simply making a selection and filling it with a gradient tool. I'm adding more purple details on the hand as well. As you can see, I draw the hand a bit more properly, adding more details. Now I'm going to start adding details on the drapery as well, and I work up the skull further. So you can see I just zoomed closer, and I would like to work up the skull a little bit further and the whole cape around it. I'm cleaning up the edges as well. It's getting there, but it's still not finished. I'm still not happy with the results, even though it's just a concept or a sketch. I would like to add a little bit more details. So I'm just playing around and thinking of something like this, using, again, just simply the brush tool. I added some details there. And then I'm going to add some more shadows to make or increase the contrast, and I work up a little bit more details on the skull. Now again, if you know more about anatomy, then it comes really handy when you draw skeletons. So it's really good to practice drawing skulls and bones and skeletons. And if you know your anatomy well, then it will really help you whenever you need to create a character, the whole character itself. But in this case, drawing skulls comes really handy, because I can add some fine details there. I'm working on the eye details, and I'm adding a little bit of glow on the eye, just to add more life to it. You can see I'm again working on the edges, just to define the details there. And for this I just used a brush tool with black. Now I'm again using the burn tool to define or emphasize the shadows that will make the whole drapery more three-dimensional. I'm using some more colors on the staff, and I try to define the shadow of the staff on the drapery. Will also make it look a bit more three-dimensional. And I'm almost done. I would like to just add some shadows on the ground. So we already have that light there, but to make it look more realistic, I need to have a shadow behind the skeleton, and something like that. And I also changed the light source a bit. That's why it's good to have that on a separate layer. So now just the final touches on the image. I'm using again a separate layer to create these bolts coming out from the headpiece, and just to create that effect, that electrical shock around it. And I'm just changing the opacity, adding a little bit of blur on it. And basically that's all what we need. Obviously we can always continue working after this point, but for this tutorial that's all I wanted to show. So you can see the technique that we've learned in the last episode, drawing drapery, can come really handy whenever you work on a digital painting, in this case on a character design. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you will join me next time as well. So practice, and I hope I will see you next time. Thanks a lot for your attention.